This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien starts today's show by talking about grain prices for this week's grain market outlook. He also explains his updated balance sheets on corn and soybeans. Continuing the show by discussing Palmer Amaranth is K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster, as she reminds growers why it is critical to get control of the weed and how it can hopefully be done. A weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond wraps up the show as he mentions how parts of Kansas have received almost too much rain while others are still very dry. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with the grain market update with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, what are we seeing on the futures market?
Well, continued sideways, relatively low movement. We've had moisture. I think our colleague Chip Redmond will talk about that we've generally had cooler and wetter conditions in some areas of the Corn Belt than had been expected. Still, and a lot of what my thoughts are about where we're going in the future has to do with whether we maintain such positive, supportive crop weather or not. Still lean towards the majority forecast of hotter, drier conditions coming later on and balance of July on into August, September. So the next 90 days tell the story. And in anticipation of that, you've got on actually Wednesday, when the markets were last open, D's corn closed at 419.5. September 405.5. I think we try to watch too where the volume of trade is on those. Again, we're now into July, well into the contract closing period for the July contract, and just very, very light volume left in that volume and open interest left in that July contract at all. So we pretty much transitioned over to the September contract. And actually, most of the volume, there's 165,000 bushel contracts. So you got a bunch of contracts in September contract, but you also have that and a bit more in the D's contract. So we're definitely new crop focused and oriented in how we're looking at these markets. And soybeans, soybeans have found some support. There's strength that's been happening in the soybean, general oilseed oil markets from both Europe and the Black Sea region, Ukraine, in terms of lack of availability of sunflower supplies. I think it's canola rapeseed. So anyway, you've got that happening, providing some support for soybeans. November closed at 11.21. We were down to 11, so it's not like 50 cents to $1 higher, but at least it's found support and not quite as prone to go down. And I would say too that same issue of rolling out of the July contract into the August contract in the soybean complex, that's already happened largely. Again, you have just 2,700 contracts left in July now, and the August contract has 96,600. So we've pretty much rolled, and of course, most of the focus again, just like for corn, is come into the soybean complex. November soybeans, again, 407,000, 5,000 bushel contracts. So the markets are putting their money into the new crop contracts. We're not just rolling only into the upfront lead contracts in between there. So it is as it is. And of course, for wheat, we've been kind of sideways in the wheat market. Again, we had such a run up earlier, over 750 happening within the last 45 days, had fallen down to about 575, and really have been pretty much going sideways from there. So not a lot of change. And we've got harvest going on. I think as you follow the harvest reports, I think we have mixed signals. I hear some great yields. I hear some disappointing yields, a lot having to do with the moisture from last fall, as I understand it. So anyway, we'll see how all that plays out. So far, we haven't had any thunderbolts driving the wheat market largely higher. And the issues that still ways out there are our international wheat market numbers out of the Black Sea region. That's still there. We have more reports, sustaining reports, showing differences between the USDA and in-country projections for major crops coming out of Brazil and Argentina, Brazil in particular, that we still haven't converged yet. So that's still a surprise that could happen out there. Prices have gone low enough that U.S. exports of some of these crops are very competitive with what's happening out of South America. So I guess you're trying to make cider out of bad apples. When the price is low enough, you do end up and spur on export usage. We do see profitability now in the ethanol sector from relatively low priced corn. I guess the challenging part would be that we have coming out of that quarterly stocks report, we had more grain on farm for some of these major crops than we'd had in past years, and so farmers still holding on to grain, old crop grain, looking to sell. So a lot of pressure right now building up, and if we don't have a major move to the higher side based on weather or whatever, then in the next 30, 45 days, there'll be some pretty anguished sales in the cash market. But again, that's we'll see what July and August bring for that.
And are there places in the country where weather is really playing a big role in what we're seeing in the markets, or could be playing a big role?
Yeah, and you can see on the soil moisture maps where those major rains came in, floods in the northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, South Dakota area, and you've got crop damage there, farmland damage. But it's really interesting when you move outside of that and look at literally the rest of the Corn Belt dry, just really dry. So to me, you just got a conundrum of a situation to where you have a few places very, very wet, almost everywhere else pretty dry, at least hot weather forecast the next 60, 90, 100, 120 days or so, or at least 90 days. And it just, I think where we're at right now is we do have a weather influenced market. We've had enough things happen to bring moisture to hold off hot, dry conditions that the market is not worried about things yet. They're not expressing that in terms of price moves. So here we stand with prices that farmers wish were sharply higher, but they're not yet, but still a lot of risk given our best weather forecasters and what they expect. We still expect challenges to come, but it's not here yet. So the market says, okay, show me. We'll see. Will it come or not? And we have farmers' old crop sales riding on the outcome.
Dan, something you wanted to share with our listeners today are some updated balance sheet numbers, and starting off with what you saw for corn.
In essence, if you just take the new crop acreage numbers, a little bit higher acreage, so you turn what had been about a 14.8 billion bushel crop at 181 bushels an acre into about a 15.1 billion. So 300 million more, but it does take away worry for the ending stocks figure. If you plug in the previous record, which I'm more inclined to do, 177.3 bushels per acre, you're still, even with these higher planted numbers and harvested acres numbers, you're still at only 14.8 billion. And then if you have anything less than that, tying that record, then you're 14.6, 14.5. Ending stocks get below 2 billion bushels, but so and prices respond in kind, going from 440 up closer to 5 or over 5. But that's all waiting to see what happens. And did the same type of numbers, a little bit lower planted acreage for soybeans. And if you just go strictly on the yields, holding everything else unchanged, then the USDA's record projection, 52 bushels an acre, and prices at 11.20, you end up and see a fair response if you go to 51, 49, 47 bushels. Of course, the likelihood of that right now, hard to put a major probability on that. But in my own thinking on soybeans, if you're thinking there's about a 30% chance that the USDA is right, that and these, especially for corn, these record high yields for corn and soybeans. But if you come in with just a good yield, a very good yield, and I'd put more probability, more likelihood on that happening, 40% instead of 30%. And it makes all the difference for soybeans of something at 11.20 versus something above 12.5 to 13 or more. It makes all the difference for corn, as we kind of talked about a little bit, of 440 as they had projected to something close to $4.75, $5 or more for the season average price. So in the most objective mode that we can be here at K-State, I think we still have to look at the probability of these alternative outcomes and see not where we stand right now on giving what we've just seen through early July, but we need to see August, September, October to see how all this finally plays out.
And Dan, rounding out today's conversation, something we don't usually talk about but wanting to make a mention of, what are you seeing around cotton right now?
The amount of cotton acreage in Kansas I think it's projected to be at 110,000 acres. That was unchanged from earlier, from the prospective plannings report, down just a little bit from last year. But the big story is on the national side. We saw acres jump up from year to year about 9 heading towards 10%. So although Kansas didn't change a lot, especially down in Texas and Arkansas and some other states, they had sharp increases in cotton. So I guess we'll see the cotton marketing driven so much by their loan program and working with commercial gins, et cetera, for quality components, that cotton has the opportunity to do well. And the long term for cotton in Kansas, I would say, in areas where we're struggling for water, adequate irrigation water is pretty positive. It's one of the crops that if our aquifer really does decline, we could look at what water we have left under very depleted wells and still do pretty well with cotton. So,
Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and give us our grain market outlook.
Thank you very much, Shelby. Take care.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about Palmer Amaranth with K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. Sarah, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks as always, Shelby.
Sarah, we've talked a lot about Palmer Amaranth, but just for fun, what is Palmer Amaranth?
So I like to call Palmer Amaranth public enemy number one, or Sarah's ticket to job security. Really, it's a summer annual dicot weed that's adapted to dry climates and hot weather. So think about most of western Kansas, and there you go. This is why this is such a problem. It's actually native to the desert Southwest and has spread from there in our cropping systems.
And really have to have a good handle on control of it.
Yeah, so Palmer Amaranth, the reason it's public enemy number one is because it produces so darn many seeds, Shelby. So lots of seeds, and part of that is a lot of genetic diversity. So Palmer Amaranth is interesting in that it's a dioecious plant, which is just a $5 word that means it has male plants and female plants. And so because of the number of seeds and that potential for outcrossing, there's a ton of genetic diversity in that species, which makes it very likely that it's going to develop herbicide resistance. So not only do you have a super competitive plant, you've got a plant that is difficult to kill.
And seeing herbicide resistance then in Palmer Amaranth?
Oh, man, yeah. So I just put together some handouts for CCA training, and as part of that, I did sort of a tally on the different herbicide modes of action and what weeds have resistance to which one. And pretty much Palmer Amaranth, or its slightly smaller and less aggressive cousin, don't tell our friends in the I states that I said that because they think water hemp is terrible, but it's slightly less challenging cousin, water hemp. They're on every list. So if you have a herbicide and you suspect that there's a weed with resistance to that herbicide, that weed is probably going to be Palmer Amaranth or water hemp that has resistance.
Interesting. So maybe how could producers get this under control, but should they have done something before we've even gotten to this stage?
So the ticket to successful weed management in grain sorghum, Shelby, is that at planting herbicide application with lots of residual herbicides. Unfortunately for grain sorghum producers, Shelby, there are not a ton of labeled herbicide options for weed management in grain sorghum. So as we think about our at-planting herbicide applications, we need a healthy dose of atrazine, a group 15 herbicide. Oftentimes that will be S-metolachlor. And then a lot of times we will put some mesotrione or callisto in that mix as well.
Sarah, wanting to take kind of a deeper dive into those different herbicides and starting with atrazine, can you share us a little bit more information about that for using it?
Yeah, so atrazine is the backbone of our corn and grain sorghum weed management program, Shelby. We need it pre-emergence, and we also use it post-emergence in grain sorghum. There are some height restrictions, so depending on where you are, you need to wait until it's at least 3 leaf or 6 inches tall, the grain sorghum, and then you can only apply it up to 12-inch grain sorghum. So there are some restrictions there. But, atrazine does a good job of pre-emergence control of things like Palmer Amaranth, and it also helps to increase the activity of some of our other post-emergence herbicides, namely things like Callisto, which can only be applied pre in grain sorghum, also Husky.
And something else that producers could look at using, however, maybe a little bit of grain sorghum damage, AIM.
So AIM is going to be effective on small pigweeds, not going to be super effective on large pigweeds. And it does it's a PPO inhibiting herbicide, and those PPO inhibiting herbicides do cause some leaf burn on grain sorghum and really a lot of the crops, so we spray them over.
Should sometimes growers maybe combine that with 2,4-D?
I think so. One of the things that I think about when I get these sort of rescue situation types of calls in grain sorghum is what I kind of call the kitchen sink approach. It's any one herbicide that we have available is not going to do the job. But if we can find the right combination of herbicides, we can probably salvage the crop and have some yield and make it harvestable.
With a little bit of damage maybe to that grain sorghum leaves, recovering from that nicely?
Yeah, usually after that initial few days, once that next leaf comes out, because AIM is a contact herbicide, once that next leaf comes out, you're not going to see the visual symptoms there.
What about for growers who might want to use dicamba?
Yeah, so 2,4-D and dicamba probably have the greatest potential for weed control of the herbicides that we have available for post-emergence weed control in grain sorghum. The problem is that we also have the potential for crop injury, right? And that crop injury generally looks like brittle stems or lodging in the grain sorghum. One of the things that we can try with those different herbicides is to use combinations of them. So combining 2,4-D and dicamba, we know that occasionally we can see some synergy, so some enhanced activity when we combine 2 Group 4 herbicides. And so it seems like maybe that could be the case here, and that could be something that folks might want to look at.
Sarah, what about using maybe something with Moxie?
Yeah, so Moxie is a herbicide that the active ingredient is bromoxynil. So clever play on the chemical name there for the trade name. That is a photosystem 2 inhibiting herbicide that is going to be most effective on smaller pigweeds. It's also a component of Husky. So I mentioned atrazine enhancing the activity of some of our Group 27 herbicides. This is an example where Bayer has a premix of a Group 27 herbicide, pyrosulfatol, and bromoxynil as a weed management tool for grain sorghum. Again, small pigweeds are the ones that we're going to control with this. If our pigweeds have any size, we're probably going to be not very happy with the control, and we will see some herbicide injury on those exposed leaves in the grain sorghum. So again, a trade-off of weed control or crop response.
And are there any technologies that might be available to growers?
So when we think about the new herbicide-resistant grain sorghums, so those would be iGrowth, Double Team, and Enzyme. When we think about those 3 technologies, Shelby, really only iGrowth has the potential for Palmer Amaranth suppression. So we talk about resistance in Palmer Amaranth being widespread, especially to ALS inhibiting herbicides. Well, the herbicide that we use in iGrowth grain sorghum is called Imiflex, and that is an ALS inhibiting herbicide. So we don't expect satisfactory levels of control from that herbicide when applied alone. However, there is some evidence, largely coming out of water hemp populations in the I-states, that we can still see some suppression of Palmer Amaranth with a herbicide like Imiflex. So as I talk about this kitchen sink style approach, if you're in an iGrowth grain sorghum system, we may be getting some benefit from our Imiflex application. The flip side of that is that a lot of folks like that Imiflex application at planting, right? Because really we're targeting grasses, right? That's generally speaking, grass control options are very limited in grain sorghum as well. And so most of our technologies are targeting some of those grass species. And so a lot of times we'll use our Imiflex at planting rather than post-emergence. But it is an option for some folks that are in that iGrowth grain sorghum system.
Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
That was K-State weed specialist Sarah Lancaster. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put a link to an Agronomy e-update article if you'd like to read more on this topic. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and Secretary Tom Vilsack.
The latest USDA effort to provide support to dairy producers with herds impacted by the H5N1 virus involves an updated version of USDA's Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish program.
Designed now to provide assistance to dairy producers who are incurring milk losses as a result of H5N1.
Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack recently explained the update in a visit with reporters, an update now published in the Federal Register.
Under the program, as we've designed it, farmers will receive payments at a 90% coverage of lost production, retroactive to the date in March of 2024 of their first positive herd.
Eligibility requirements for milk loss assistance under ELAP include:
the adult dairy cow must be the following. Must be part of a herd that has had a confirmed positive H5N1 test from the National Veterinary Services Laboratory. Must have been initially removed from commercial milk production during the 14-day time period before the sample collection date for the positive H5N1 test date, through 120 days after the sample collection date for the positive test. To be milk producing, currently lactating, and maintained for commercial milk production on the beginning date of the eligible loss condition. Now, producers must also have written in the owned cash leads purchased or having been a contract grower of eligible adult dairy cows for at least 60 days before the beginning of the production loss to essentially participate in this program. And the coverage is also going to be provided on a per cow basis for a period of up to 4 weeks per cow.
Other details within the Federal Register notice on expanded ELAP include needed documentation and payment calculations. Applications will be accepted through local Farm Service Agency offices through January 30th of next year. Secretary Vilsack adds that the coverage under ELAP
is going to build on the efforts that we've made to ensure that we're limiting the spread of the virus as it's detected. While dairy cows impacted and affected with H5N1 generally recover after a few weeks, and there's little mortality associated with this disease, it does dramatically limit milk production for a period of time, which obviously causes economic loss for producers with affected premises. And for that reason, we've chosen to support farmers with the ELAP program to offset those losses.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Once again, that was USDA's Rod Bain and Secretary Tom Vilsack on the recently announced expansion of one of USDA's emergency disaster assistance programs in efforts to assist dairy growers impacted by the H5N1 virus. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, as we look across the state of Kansas, some people are pretty wet while others are quite dry.
We had a lot of rain for parts of the state, especially down in the southwest, 5-6 inches. There's some reports of 8 inches or more in some localized areas. And then as we get further east, towards Kansas City, we had another pocket of rainfall where just a lot of rain fell in a short amount of time along I-70, all thanks to some complexes of thunderstorms that were rather slow-moving, that dumped very efficient, they were very efficient rainmakers, and dumped a lot of rainfall in a very short amount of time. So there was a lot more runoff, and unfortunately we didn't capture all of that moisture just because, well, it just ran off. It wasn't able to soak into the ground. But when we look at a bigger scale, we still have some areas that missed precipitation. We look at north central and into the Flint Hills. That area was mostly void of precipitation over the last week, with just a little bit of light rain events. And as we move forward, those are the areas we really need to focus on getting additional precipitation.
What have the temperatures been like with this weather?
Yeah, temperatures thus far have been pretty moderate when we look at just overall heat. We have had a couple of warm days where temperatures exceeded 100 degrees, but our high temperatures with the precipitation and clouds have been pretty moderated most days. And then the overnight low temperatures continue to be above normal, thanks to more moisture, more cloud cover, And as a result, we're averaging warmer than normal because of our overnight lows. But, when we look at how this summer averages in general over the last couple decades, warmer than normal temperatures are pretty common.
Can we be expecting to cool down as we look into the future?
Yeah, as we move forward, post 4th of July into the middle of July, we start to expect, we're having more cold fronts than normal. And that's been allowing cold air to move further south and weaken this big dome of high pressure that we've had. And as a result, that's going to provide us cooler than normal temperatures and continued rounds of precipitation just on the outer fringes of the high. We've got Hurricane Beryl doing pretty big media attention. They've gotten a lot of media attention down in the Gulf. And that's going to play a role in amplifying high pressure to our west. So while we'll be cooler than normal, our eyes turn to the west where temperatures are starting to warm up significantly along the west coast. And as a result, that's something we got to watch for as we move forward later in July. At least going into mid-July, cooler than normal temperatures are expected.
And what about for precipitation?
With these frequent frontal passages, we'll have periods of precipitation as well. We'll see isolated areas of heavy rain again. For the most part, it seems central Kansas will be most likely favored as this pattern has kind of shifted west or east a little bit. And that, in the result, will allow some moisture. I just don't think most people are going to get a lot of rain. It's going to be the continued isolated areas of heavy rainfall with overall not widespread precipitation. But that'll hopefully be enough to get the folks that do need moisture some and help ease conditions in central Kansas.
Chip, what about for the long-term forecast?
Yeah, we'll watch that ridge of high pressure in the west. That's developing a lot of heat with not a lot of moisture. And that as that shifts to the east into July, early August, it'll likely bring a potential for warmer than normal temperatures and a decrease in this precipitation probabilities. We still think we're going to end July in the summer overall below normal precipitation, and that's going to have, obviously, an impact on agriculture. We look at, cannabis moving into a pretty important stage, and we need moisture to keep up and grain fill, especially as we move later into the summer and that grain filling process moves north and west across the state. So, we're still not out of the woods. We still expect drought development, areas we don't have drought, and even areas that have seen recent rainfall. The soil moisture is going to dry out quickly just because we haven't had long-duration rain events. So we're not out of the woods yet, but definitely a little more moisture later into the summer than we were originally expecting.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.